Talk more politics. Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke has some big challenges if he hopes to defeat Republican Senator Ted Cruz on Election Day. They debated for what may be the last time. Good morning to Dr. Cal Jillson, political scientist at SMU. O'Rourke, if you believe the polls, has some ground to make up. He's actually dropped rather than gaining ground in recent weeks. Why do you think that might be?
Well, I think that he was gaining on Cruz pretty rapidly. He was down 12 and then 8. He got to within 2 in some polls and has dropped back to 7 to 9, which is, sort of where you would expect. I think the things that caused that were several. Senator Cornyn says it's the Kavanaugh debate in Washington, D.C. that brought Republicans home. I think it's also that Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick are advertising out of very deep war chest a broad Republican conservative message, and that's helping Cruz as well.
O'Rourke promised to run a clean, positive campaign. He has had to get a little bit down into the dirt. Is it because that works?
Well, I think it does work. He has run a really impressive campaign over the last 18 months where he's moved around the state, big crowds. He's raised a tremendous amount of money, more money than any Senate race in American history. But all of his ads have been gauzy bio ads. He's got to move to political comparison ads between him and Cruz, and then he's got to land a couple of telling blows down the stretch if he's going to close this gap.
The border is one issue where a lot of Texans of both political parties agree it is important to keep the border secure. That came up last night. Let's take a listen.
There's no race in the country with a starker divide on immigration than this race here in the state of Texas. As for me, I'm incredibly honored to have received the formal endorsement of the National Border Patrol Council, the union of the men and women who risk their lives keeping our nation safe. I will note here at this debate, I'm very pleased we have Brandon Judge and Paul Perez, both from the National Border Patrol Council. The reason they're supporting me is I've led the fight to secure the border, building a wall, using technology, increasing boots on the ground. We can keep our community safe.
No wall is going to solve legitimate security concerns, but smart policy will. And let me describe one of those to you. Senator John Cornyn and I, though he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat, he's in the Senate and I'm in the House, worked on policy together to invest in our ports of entry. That's where more than 90% of everyone and everything that ever comes into the United States first crosses. Having a better idea of who and what comes into our country demonstrably makes us safer. And at the same time, those customs officers are able to facilitate legitimate trade and travel that's connected to more than 1 million jobs in the state of Texas. As we all know,
Ted Cruz seems increasingly confident, Dr. Jillson, as the polls turn in his favor, but still about turnout. Democrats are fired up, excited about Beto O'Rourke, even if they're not that excited about many other candidates on the statewide ballot.
Yeah, I think that's right. Beto O'Rourke raised $38.1 million in the third quarter of this year. That's a war chest that he's going to dip into in the closing weeks of the campaign. And a lot of that money is going to be spent not so much on advertising as on a ground game all over the state to try to change the margins in every county, even counties he knows he's not going to win. He wants to increase the Democratic margin by 4 or 5 points, close that gap with Cruz. What Cruz was doing last night in general is just trying not to make any mistakes, to land some blows, pepper O'Rourke, but to keep the Republicans engaged, whereas O'Rourke had the more difficult task of charging up his electorate and seeming to be an appropriate home for any late deciding voters.
Ted Cruz, not the most popular guy in the United States Senate. Even a lot of fellow Republicans really just don't like him. He'll admit he's got a likability gap. That's not a big secret. Part of the discussion last night was on civility in politics. Let's take a listen to that.
When we found out that veterans were unable to access mental health care services, that 500,000 veterans with bad paper discharges were denied the ability to go to the VA, I worked with my colleague from Colorado, Mike Kaufman. Though he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat, we were able to bury the differences, compromise, a 4-letter word among some in Washington, D.C., and find a consensus piece of legislation that passed the House of Representatives 435-0, passed the Senate as well, and was signed into law by President Donald J. Trump.
At this press conference in D.C. about civility, Congressman O'Rourke again repeated his call for impeaching President Trump. That's the very essence of not civility. If we had impeachment next year, we'd see utter chaos. We would see an end to the repeal of the job-killing regulations that's fueling our economic growth. We would see an end to much of the progress we've seen rebuilding our military, making progress on foreign policy. Washington would be consumed by partisan investigations. That's not civility. Let me point out more broadly. It's interesting that Congress—
The question is, as you pointed out just a moment ago, which way do swing voters or independent voters or people who are on the fence go in this? And that is, those are the people that both sides are trying to win over.
Yeah, I think that's right. Ted Cruz pretty clearly won that border security clip that we heard a minute ago on civility. I thought that Beto O'Rourke won very cleanly because Ted Cruz, in a piece of tape that we didn't show there, went off on the Democrats, calling them an angry mob, radical left wing, that kind of thing. So Ted Cruz is known as an acquired taste, not an easily likable guy, and I think he showed it on that civility question. But both campaigns are running a base strategy. Their goal is to turn out absolutely all of their already committed voters, recognizing, as Karl Rove used to teach us 15 years ago, that there are very few people in the middle and they're not really listening very closely. So you work to turn out your people who are already with you rather than worry about those few people in the middle who aren't listening. I think O'Rourke knows he needs them more than Cruz thinks he needs them. So O'Rourke will talk to him a little bit. Cruz will ignore them.
Dr. Cal Jillson, words of wisdom. Thanks very much for putting things into perspective as Election Day or early voting is about ready to begin. Thanks for joining us. So, are you ready to vote, or do you just wish this would all be over? You can tell it to Tim at 214-468-7447. No need to be civil on that one either.